Last week, we spoke about rhythm as an important component underlying the melody of English, or any language for that matter. This week, we will continue that exploration by talking about intonation. Intonation refers to the changes in pitch over an utterance, the pitch pattern of an utterance. And as we saw last week, an utterance is what you say in one continuous stream, and it is bound by pauses on both ends. So what exactly is pitch? Pitch is a perceptual property of sound that relates to its frequency, to the number of cycles per second, or hertz. It allows us to judge a tone as being high or low. So I'm going to play two tones, and you will see that one tone is higher, the other one is lower. That's tone number one. Tone number two. Obviously, tone number two is higher than tone number one. Okay, that is pitch. That is our perception of the frequency of these two sounds. The higher the frequency, the higher the pitch is perceived to be. And conversely, the lower the frequency of a given sound, the lower its pitch is perceived to be. When we speak, our pitch varies naturally. If it didn't, we would sound like this, and it won't be very interesting, right? Our pitch does vary, and we already talked about one context in which our pitch varies. We talked about word stress, and we also talked about the rhythm, the stress pattern across an utterance, and we said that stressed syllables tend to have a higher pitch, right? So we already talked about that one context in which the pitch changes over an utterance. Each language has its own rules and guidelines around the intonation patterns that are allowed in it. For example, the intonation patterns in French are distinctly different from those in English. So if you speak French with an English intonation pattern, or if you speak English with a French intonation pattern, it's going to sound off. Additionally, intonation can differ very significantly between dialects of the same language. So different versions of English that are spoken around the world, whether it be American English, Australian English, British English, Irish English, Scottish English, South African English, Trinidadian English, Indian English, all of them have their own distinct intonation patterns. In fact, that is one of the key ways in which these different accents differ from one another. Just like rhythm, we talked about rhythm last week, just like rhythm, intonation is another way to highlight, to acoustically highlight content units. This is another overarching trait of language. This is a second thread that is weaving our words together. Getting the intonation right makes your message easy to understand and process. It makes it efficiently understood. So understanding these governing rules for intonation and using the correct intonation pattern in your speech is absolutely essential. It helps you become an efficient, effective communicator, and it also makes your speech sound natural and fluent. Today we're going to talk about the three main intonation patterns that American English has. The first one is a falling intonation. There are two types of sentences that use falling intonation. The first type are statements. Here are some examples. The boy went home. Listen to the pitch. Listen to what's happening. The boy went home. On that last part, we are dipping. All right? Yes, there are little inflections in between, but at the end of the utterance, there's a very marked dip. The boy went home. Listen to the next sentence. I need to go to the store. I need to go to the store. The man brought his umbrella with him. The man brought his umbrella with him. The woman is walking to the beach. The woman is walking to the beach. In all those statements, there is a very clear dip in pitch at the end of the utterance. This signals to the listener that, your sentence, your utterance is ending. It is a logical break. One thought is ending and the next one is about to begin. This is what I mean by it helps the listener process your message. It gives the listener clues as to what's going on, what's coming next. The second type of sentence that uses a falling intonation are open-ended questions. Open-ended questions are essentially questions that cannot be answered by yes or no. They are information-seeking questions. In order to answer that question, you have to provide some information. You cannot just say yes or no. Where did the boy go? Who is picking me up? How did you make it? When is your flight? What is he doing here? Why is the girl jumping? The second intonation pattern American English uses is a rising intonation. So at the end of the utterance, the pitch raises. This type of intonation is used for yes/no questions. Here are some examples. Did the boy go home? Did the boy go home? Is the mango sweet? The house is empty? This is not a formal sentence construction, but typically when we speak, we often use this type of construction. The correct way, of course, would be, is the house empty? But we often say, the house is empty. And we distinguish between that being a statement versus that being a question by changing that intonation. So if we say the house is empty, with the falling intonation at the end, we know it's a statement. If we say the house is empty, going up, we know it's a question, even though the words were the exact same in the two sentences. The construction was exactly the same. Can you stand up? May I watch the game? Will I be able to reach the shelf? All of these are yes/no questions, and they all have that rising intonation at the end. The second type of sentence that has a rising intonation are tag questions. What are tag questions? Here are some examples. The boy went home, didn't he? That last part is the tag. That is where our rising pitch is happening. She is tall, isn't she? We will go, won't we? This is a mistake, right? All of those were tag questions, and they all had rising intonation at the end. The third type of intonation pattern is called a rise-fall intonation pattern. There are bits that rise and bit that falls predictably. And this is usually used for lists of items. Here is an example. I bought eggs, milk, juice, and bananas. Listen to what happened. Eggs, milk, juice, all three went up. They are items in a list, but they are not the last item. And for the last item, our pitch dipped. Bananas. Again, to the listener, it indicates, it's the end of the list. We are done with our list. Let's take another example. I visited Germany, Greece, Italy, and France. Same thing. Germany, Greece, Italy had rising intonation. France had a falling intonation. That was the last item in our list. Here is one more example. The blocks were red, green, yellow, orange, and blue. Red, green, yellow, orange, and blue. Okay, so rise, fall intonation. English is not a tonal language like Mandarin. So changing the tone of a word doesn't change its inherent meaning. For example, if you say house, like in a statement, versus house, like in a question, you're not changing the meaning. House still means house, a place, a dwelling for humans. It's not like Mandarin where you change the tone and, it goes from horse to mother. It's not like that. But in English, changing the meaning can change the emotion, the intent, the motivation, and the emphasis that you are trying to convey. We'll talk about that in a different video. Here's a quick summary of what we reviewed today. We talked about what pitch is. We talked about what intonation is. We talked about the 3 main intonation patterns in English, and we reviewed specific examples of each intonation pattern. I hope you found it interesting. As always, like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you next week.